Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Rose and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunello Rosa. This week, we're covering the latest of the geopolitical news. While there's a lot happening, what really caught our headlines was the BRICS enlargement process, effectively the the polylateral institution representing much of the developing world, seeks to become much larger. Brunello, could you give us a bird's eye view on this? Because this enlargement debate has been going on for almost a decade now, but we finally got the first sort of substantive steps towards it. What are the headline points? What should we know?
So I would say two main points. The first one is the member states that have joined. So we are talking about six more countries, as you said: Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Ethiopia, the UAE, and Egypt. And as you know, there's a much larger pipeline in the waiting list, including important countries such as Indonesia and so on. But this was the first six admitted to BRICS, which here if you find a new acronym. But this is the second point. What is it that is being created? This is a much larger group that already represents the vast majority of the world population and clearly also of economic growth now and in the future. Is also already uh, quite a large um, chunk of Chinese export, which means that China, little by little, can start detaching itself from its two historical clients, so the US and Europe. Not just now, this is too early, but in perspective, the next 50 years, these countries will be gigantic, while the US and Europe would be smaller in relative terms. It makes sense for China to shift. So this was in fact the China project. China wanted this enlargement, wanted these countries within it, and you also wanted this new group to be a sort of geopolitical rival of the G7. We have discussed this months ago, and now it's come to fruition. We called it the MG7, you remember, versus the DMG7, which is the traditional one. But now it's not just 7, it's 11, and it will be larger. And therefore, that's, I would say, these are the two key points of this alliance.
We've spoken in the past, and I just want to pick up that point about China in particular, about effectively these institutions becoming a theater for great power competition, often by way of proxy. And so often, countries like China are trying to use the BRICS to leverage their own influence, especially through the enlargement process in a particular way. What should we know about that, and how does this enlargement basically fit into the sort of larger context of the sort of U.S.-China Cold War, so to say?
Yeah, so we know there's this ongoing Cold War between US and China, Cold War II, the way we call it. Um, and this means a separation, decoupling, eventually, we believe, Balkanization, which means real um, division, profound division, almost without communication between the two sides, between, say, US and China. And the first victim, of course, of this process that multilateral organizations, especially those who are supposed to be in charge, let's call it that way, of global governance. First and foremost, the UN Security Council, which is clearly now divided between Russia and China on the one end, and US, UK, and France on the other end. And very hard to get anything done as long as each of these five countries has veto power. The second one, exactly because there's an absence of the UN Security Council, is the G20. G20 is kind of a much larger gathering than the G7, where lots of energy markets are invited and have a seat at the table. But what's the point of having an organization that replicates the divisions that you find on a larger scale? Because also the G20 is balkanized between the friends of China and the friends of the US. It was already a miracle that in November 2022, the G20 managed to come up with a single communique highlighting the agreed points. But let's see, there's a new G20, as you know, in India at the moment. Let's see what kind of communique will be published at the end of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, just like you mentioned, Xi Jinping has already confirmed that he will not attend the G20 meeting. There's a lot of attention paid, particularly to the presence, but also the absence of leaders, particularly when they're kind of, larger than life, just like Xi Jinping. I'm wondering if you think his absence will be a shadow that looms over the conference that will actually make a big impact.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the confirmation they will not be coming to Delhi is of large significance. It's not just by chance. She wants to say, I have my own gathering now. It's called BRICS, a large BRICS with 11 countries, the one I really care about. If I need to speak with the US, I can do on a bilateral basis. If I need to speak with the Eurozone or the EU in general, I can do on a bilateral basis as I do. I really don't need the G20 for these things to happen. Also because we know that there's another elephant in the room there, and it's the absence clearly of Vladimir Putin. Because we know there's a arrest warrant hanging on his head from the International Criminal Court. Wherever he goes and the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction, he should be arrested. You remember all the problems that we had in South Africa just recently for the BRICS meeting. So clearly, when two of the major world leaders are missing, by definition, the level of the discussion is lower. And there's the risk that other countries would say, okay, if China is not sending the president, but only the prime minister, you know what, I'm not going to go myself, the US leader might say, I'm going to send my vice president. Or the EU Commission and EU Council may come up with something similar. Some heads of state might decide not to come. So it could be a bit of an avalanche effect. But most importantly, more than the people there, is the kind of agreements that we make. Clearly, the commitment of large proportion is credible only if the country leaders are signing it. Otherwise, it might be written on the Warsaw. So to conclude, I mean, Xi's decision not to come is, I think, deliberate. Only saying G20 is as useless as the UN Security Council. I have my own gathering. This is where the real decisions will be made going forward.
Absolutely. I think we're all going to keenly watch the communique that's always issued at the end of these summits that summarizes the leadership's sort of agreement, or whether there is a communique at the end of it at all. But either way, I think, like you said, it's very likely to reflect the already very polarized and fractured nature of geopolitics in the world. As always, Brunello, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much. Until next time.